Hi, good morning, and welcome to a meditation. This meditation is a meditation of Sunday. It is a Sunday meditation because last Sunday, on the 23rd of July, we had what we call a grasse matin. The word a grasse matin in French, it is that morning when you wake up later, or Saturday morning or Sunday morning when you don't work. And it comes from the word fat. It's a fat morning, but the word grace in French sounds just like fat. So we call it grasse mat from grace, the morning grace. So it is playing on words that it's more easy to understand if you speak French. So in these grace mornings, we have a special service. We put these little tables that we bought in IKEA, and we have a croissant and some apple pies and nice French stuff with tea and coffee. And people come to worship the Lord, and then we have a time of discussion around a theme, and of course we have the message. And the theme for this grasse mat of the 23rd of July, it was the joy of the Lord. So we meditate on the joy of the Lord, but before that, we had a few quotes from famous people on joy. And finally, we had the meditation in Romans chapter 15, verse 13. May the God of hope fill you with all joy and peace as you trust in him, so that you may overflow with hope by the power of the Holy Spirit. So this is a prayer for the Roman church. It's in the book of Romans, and Paul is praying for the Christians in Rome. It is interesting to realize that a few years after this prayer, that church started being persecuted by Nero, by the Roman emperor. So it is important for these people to understand that they have been filled with God's joy, because they are going to go through a terrible time. So what is special about this joy? It's not the joy that you have when you open a present, when you arrive in your country, and if you're traveling abroad, or if you are a foreigner in the country where you live, when you go back to your country and you see your family, you see your friends waiting for you at the airport, you have got an amazing joy. I remember that every time I go to Brazil and I fly to the state of Rio, I'm always so happy to see my family there waiting for me. But of course, when I leave the country, when I come back to France, there's going to be a sadness in my heart. So I'm not talking about that joy, or a joy that people will be feeling next weekend, when they start, actually this week, when they start the festivals of Bayona here where I live, where there's going to be cows on the street running after people. And it is a time of great joy for some people. And it's also a time to drink a lot. So for nearly a week, people be on the streets dancing, drinking, having cows running after them. And people go there because they say that there's going to be a time of great joy. But then in a week's time, the festivals will be over. And then what is people going to do to get that joy again? It's not the joy that you have when your football team or rugby team wins. You'll be rejoicing because of that. But then next time your team loses, you're not going to be rejoicing anymore. We are talking about a different joy here, and Paul explains to us what sort of joy is that in Galatians chapter 5, verses 22. Verse 22, but the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, etc. So Paul is talking about joy that comes from the Holy Spirit. It's the fruit of the Spirit. I went in the internet, in my French dictionary, to understand what joy here means. Actually, it's even better if you try to understand what it is in Greek. Just talk, of course, about the fruit of a tree. An apple that comes from an apple tree a fig that comes from a fig tree, but it also talks about the fruit of someone's womb. A woman will give birth to a child, and that child is the fruit of that woman's womb. So we are talking about children here as well as about flowers and fruits, everything that is being produced. Here, joy comes from the Holy Spirit. And actually, it comes from love, which comes from the Holy Spirit, because the fruit of the Spirit is love. God's love, of course. In Romans chapter 5, verse 5, Paul says that our hope does not put us to shame. Why not? Because God's love has been poured out into our hearts through the Holy Spirit that has been given to us. So the Holy Spirit gives us God's love, and God's love gives us joy. We have got that joy that actually comes from the Holy Spirit. It is the fact that we are filled with that joy, says Paul, that we are going to know what hope really is. It's not, as we say in French, croiser les doigts. When you cross your fingers, you might say that in English as well. When you cross your fingers, you are hoping that something good is going to happen or something bad is not going to happen at all. We're not talking about that sort of hope. Hope here comes from the Holy Spirit as well. When you're filled with joy, you know what hope is. And you have joy because you have received love in your heart. God's love, not your love. God's love. And that love comes from the Holy Spirit. We know that to receive the Holy Spirit, we have to be born from above, says Jesus, because those who haven't got the Holy Spirit, they haven't got the Holy Spirit. It's because they don't belong to Christ. When you belong to Christ, you receive the Holy Spirit, you receive God's love in your heart, you receive that joy, supernatural joy, I would call it. Let's read a few more texts where we see the word joy in Greek here in the New Testament, or the verb to rejoice. Interesting situations where this joy is going to appear. Of course, I could only choose a few verses. I could not choose all the verses because we'd be meditating on this for the rest of the day. Philippians chapter 4, verse 4, it is very interesting because Paul wrote this letter when he was in prison in Rome, like he wrote Ephesians, Colossians, Philemon. He was in prison and he wrote a letter that is known as the letter of joy. Because in this letter, the verb to rejoice, where we are going to find in the word joy is inside the verb to rejoice in English, but especially here in Greek. And Paul, from his prisons, right into the Philippians, over 1,000 kilometers away from where he was, he says this: rejoice in the Lord always. I will say it again, rejoice. So it is an exhortation for people to rejoice whatever happens. He's in prison. Those people are going to be persecuted one day, but Paul is telling them to rejoice. He's in prison because of the gospel, as he's going to say in one of his letters. But he's telling people to rejoice. It's the best thing you can do. So Paul's prayer to the Romans is that they will be filled with that joy. They have received that joy, but he wants them to be filled with it, because that joy is going to help them to go through life. Peter wrote as well about that joy to people who are in dispersion, people who are not at their houses. They lost their homes, they lost their jobs, and they were in Asia Minor, where people go today on holiday. Maybe not this week because it's really hot there, because Asia Minor is actually where Turkey is today. It's the same territory. And Peter writing to those people in his first letter to them, verse 8 says, though you have not seen him, you love him. And even though you do not see him now, you believe in him and are filled with an inexpressible and glorious joy. You cannot even describe it. They are being persecuted. They had to run. They had to leave their houses behind. They had to leave everything behind, but they are filled with joy. You see, it is a supernatural joy. Do you agree with me that it is a supernatural joy? I mean, their team haven't won. It's not their birthday party. They haven't gone to the festivals of Bayona or to the carnival of Rio. but they are filled with a glorious joy. Why? Because they love Jesus. That's what the text is saying. You love him, and you are filled with an inexpressible and glorious joy. What an amazing text. Very encouraging text. John, when he wrote on his third letter, he's writing this letter to a church, and he's saying this in verse 4 because there is only one chapter in 3rd John. I have no greater joy than to hear that my children are walking in the truth. I have no greater joy. The greater joy he could experience was to know that his disciples, his children, his brothers and sisters, they were walking in the truth. Like Peter is saying to those people who are being persecuted, you love Jesus, you are being persecuted, but you love him. And then you are rejoicing in him, as he was rejoicing in prison. Paul wasn't rejoicing in prison because he was in prison and he was saying, I'm in prison, I'm suffering. No. It's because he had Jesus. If you are in prison or not in prison, you have Jesus, you have the same joy. You are going through a wonderful time in your life, you have that joy. When you go through tribulations, you are still in that joy. I've got this channel that belongs to the Baptist Church here in France, and but because I'm often on YouTube, I receive other videos from other people, music and commentaries, meditations, and of course I have access to what people are saying in these videos as well. When people sometimes say things, or you can actually comment this meditation as well if you'd like to. And I was listening to this song that talks about there was Jesus. You might have know that song. And I read a commentary left by a lady who said, the other day I buried my son, but fortunately there was Jesus. Isn't that beautiful? I mean, it's sad, isn't it? But that person who had to bury her child is saying, I went through a terrible time, but I have got joy in my heart, not because I lost my child, of course, but because there's Jesus. When Jesus is in our life, we have got joy, because joy comes from the love of God, and the love of God comes from the Holy Spirit, and this all comes from God's heart to us. First Thessalonians chapter 1 verse 6, Paul says, you became imitators of us and imitators of the Lord, for you welcomed the message in the midst of a severe suffering with the joy given by the Holy Spirit. They received the message through a terrible time, in the midst of a difficult time, severe suffering, he says here, but they received it with the joy of the Holy Spirit. Interesting. They were going through a terrible time, but they received it with the joy of the Holy Spirit. It's the only joy that could actually help us to go through a terrible time. James says in chapter 1, verses 2 to 4, consider it pure joy. What? When your team wins a cup, when your country won the World Cup, or the Tour de France that has just finished here in France? No. Consider it pure joy, my brothers and sisters, whenever you face trials of many kinds. The trials here it's a reason to rejoice. Not because of the trials, of course, but because we belong to Jesus Christ. He is talking here about the trials that people had to suffer because they were disciples of Christ, of course. You know that the background of the letter of James is also those people who were dispersed, who were not at their places, their homes. They might even be the same people to whom Peter was writing to. And we believe that he wrote to Jewish people, to Christians from Jewish background. Rejoice, though you are going through a time of tribulation. I know it's not easy when you go through a time of tribulation. But as Paul is writing to the Romans when he prays for them, the hope, the God of hope, will fill our hearts with joy. His joy, perfect joy, a joy that comes from the Holy Spirit. And only the Holy Spirit can really fill us with the joy that comes from eternity, that doesn't come from men. Because if you depend on our own joy to survive, we'll give up. We'll give up. We won't continue running to the end because it is hard. Sometimes life is extremely difficult. And we know that lots of our brothers and sisters are being persecuted today in the world. There's lots of injustice in this world. But we can trust the Holy Spirit that gives us the perfect joy, the perfect joy that we need to face the different situations in our lives today. God bless you.